The monolithic facade of Blackwood Academy of Music, a formidable edifice of stone and ancient ivy, cast a long shadow over Amira Daniels. Its grand entrance, a symphony of carved oak and polished brass, seemed to exhale centuries of privileged artistry, an atmosphere almost suffocating in its refined arrogance. 11 years old, small for her age but with eyes that missed nothing. Amira felt the immense weight of the institution press down on her, her scholarship, a thin lifeline into this exclusive world, felt less like an invitation and more like an accidental intrusion. This was not the vibrant, spontaneous music of her community center, where melodies erupted from shared joy. This was Blackwood, a fortress of classical dogma, where the very air seemed to vibrate with a chilling, hierarchical precision. The orientation buzzed with the low hum of excited chatter, a symphony of whispers and the rustle of tailored uniforms. Amira found herself swallowed by the opulent hall, a stark contrast to her own humble attire. She observed the sea of faces around her, overwhelmingly uniform in their fair complexions and an almost aristocratic composure. A familiar, cold dread began to coil in her stomach, the unsettling premonition of being othered, a sensation she had learned to anticipate in spaces designed for those who didn't look like her. She slipped into an empty seat near the back, hoping to disappear, to become an invisible observer, a strategy honed through years of navigating environments where her presence often felt like a challenge to the status quo. The morning unfolded with ritualistic precision, reverent recitations of the Academy's hallowed history, the rigid articulation of its uncompromising curriculum. Then, the air in the hall seemed to congeal as teacher Albert Royce, the formidable head of the music department, strode onto the dais. His presence was a sudden, jarring shift, a cold gust cutting through the polite warmth of the introductory speeches. Royce, a man etched with the severe lines of unyielding tradition, his silver hair meticulously coiffed, surveyed the new intake with an almost predatory gaze. His eyes, devoid of any warmth, lingered on Amira for a fraction of a second too long, a subtle but unmistakable flicker of dismissiveness that sent a jolt of ice through her veins. She felt it, an almost imperceptible sneer that spoke volumes, settling deep in her gut like a stone. "Welcome, new students." Royce's voice resonated, sharp and unyielding, filling the vast hall. Blackwood Academy is not a place for the faint of heart, nor for those who dabble in mere pastime. We cultivate masters, uphold the very pillars of musical heritage. Innovation, without reverence, is merely noise. Dedication, unwavering and absolute, is the only currency of entry here. His words were a direct challenge, a gauntlet thrown. He then announced the immediate preliminary assessment, a simple, public demonstration of musical fundamentals. Students would be called forward, individually, to perform basic scales or a short sight-reading exercise. It was a common enough procedure, yet under Royce's steely gaze, it felt less like an assessment and more like a public inquisition. The first few students, eager and practiced, approached the grand piano. Their performances met with Royce's curt, almost condescending nods or terse, surgical critiques. Each interaction further solidified the oppressive hierarchy he embodied. Then, his voice sliced through the tension, a name dropping into the expectant silence like a stone into still water. Amira Daniels. Amira's breath hitched. A searing flush crept up her neck, her heart thudding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had braced herself for scrutiny, but not this immediate, unflinching spotlight. Slowly, deliberately, she rose, her small frame feeling acutely exposed as she began the long walk to the front, towards the imposing black grand piano that dominated the stage. Every eye in the hall seemed to bore into her, 1,000 pinpricks of curiosity, skepticism, and an almost morbid anticipation. Teacher Royce stood sentinel beside the piano, his silhouette a looming figure against the brilliant light from the arched windows. He gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Daniels, take a seat." His voice was stripped bare of any professional cordiality. his tone a stark, cutting contrast to the grudging acknowledgments he had afforded the other students. Your application, if I recall correctly, mentions a somewhat unconventional background. Self-taught. You claim no formal tutors, no prestigious institutions. His words were not questions, but accusations, each syllable laced with a potent blend of skepticism and barely concealed contempt. The room, which had held its breath, exhaled in an uncomfortable, pregnant silence. The heat on Amira's cheeks intensified, a burning wave of indignation and humiliation. Yet she met his gaze, her jaw subtly set. "Yes, sir," she managed, her voice a thin thread, but steady. "Mostly." Royce let out a short, hollow sound, a mockery of a chuckle that grated on the ears. "Remarkable. Truly, one must commend the admissions committee for their audacious choices this year. Let us see if their adventure proves to be anything more than a regrettable detour." He plucked a sheet of music from a pile, a simple, repetitive exercise of rudimentary scales and basic arpeggios, the kind used for absolute novices. He slapped it onto the piano stand with a flourish that was anything but encouraging. "Play this, all of it, and kindly endeavor to maintain a semblance of rhythm. Our ears, Daniel's, are rather accustomed to precision." His eyes narrowed, a clear, predatory challenge, a public spectacle designed to expose and confirm what he clearly already believed her profound inadequacy. The piece itself was insultingly simple, a basic primer for any true beginner, but the context was a trap. This wasn't an evaluation. It was a deliberate, calculated act of public degradation, a performance orchestrated by a man whose prejudice clouded his judgment. The oppressive silence in the hall pressed down on Amira, heavy with unspoken biases, the collective anticipation of her inevitable failure. Her fingers, usually so nimble and intuitively expressive on the keys, felt stiff, cold, suddenly alien. She stared at the sheet music, then at the gleaming ivory, then back at Royce, whose cruel satisfaction was now undeniable, etched plainly on his face. He wanted her to flounder, to confirm his preconceived narrative of her inferiority. Amira swallowed, a bitter taste rising in her throat. This was the moment, amplified by the unforgiving spotlight and the rigid, unwelcoming structure of this new world. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her gaze dropping to the keys, and slowly, with a conscious effort to steady her trembling hands, she placed them on the cold ivory. The silence in the room stretched, taut and agonizing, punctuated only by the subtle creak of the piano bench as she subtly adjusted her posture. The humiliation was a suffocating blanket, woven from Royce's overt scorn and the uncomfortable, almost complicit stillness of her new peers. It was more than a demand to play. It was a command to fail, not to assess skill, but to validate prejudice. Every single eye in the hall was on her, waiting for the anticipated fumbling, the confirmation of their own unspoken biases. Or worse, the damning validation of Royce's cruel pronouncement. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight that seemed to push her further down onto the cold piano bench, demanding her submission, her inevitable fall, as Amira's small hands hovered over the cold, unforgiving keys. The hushed tension in the Blackwood Academy Hall began to distort, the present moment blurring into a collage of past echoes. It wasn't just the weight of Royce's scorn that pressed down on her. It was a cumulative burden, a lifetime of microaggressions and overt slights that had taught her the bitter lessons of endurance. The grand piano, once a symbol of boundless possibility, transformed into a reliquary of buried memories, each key resonating with a silenced pain. Her earliest memories were steeped in the vibrant chaos of her neighborhood, a symphony of street sounds and the laughter of children playing hopscotch on cracked pavements. Music had been everywhere, booming from open windows, thrumming from church choirs, pulsing from impromptu block parties. But beneath the joy, there was always the hum of disparity, the quiet understanding of limitations. Amira's grandmother, Nana Rose, a woman whose wisdom was as deep as the wrinkles etched on her face, had been her first teacher, not of scales and arpeggios, but of resilience. Nana Rose taught her to read the world, to see the invisible lines that divided, and to understand that sometimes the loudest defiance was a quiet, unyielding strength. Amira was 6 when she first touched a piano, not a grand instrument like this, but a dusty, chipped upright tucked away in the corner of their local community center. It was out of tune, some keys stuck. But to Amira, it was a portal. She didn't learn from sheet music or formal lessons. She learned by listening, by feeling, by letting the melodies in her head guide her fingers. The piano became her language, a secret conversation where she could express emotions that words often failed to capture. It was a place where the world's harsh edges softened, where her imagination soared, unbound by the limitations imposed by reality. But the world outside the community center often reminded her of those limitations. She remembered the school talent show when she was 8. She had meticulously practiced a complex, soulful melody she had composed herself, a piece brimming with raw emotion. She was so proud, so eager to share it. But when her turn came, the music teacher, a woman with a perpetually strained smile, had cut her off barely a minute into her performance. "That's spirited. Amira," she'd said, her voice dripping with thinly veiled condescension. "But perhaps something more. Traditional next time, something with proper structure." Amira watched as a little girl with blonde braids, who had played a simple, technically perfect rendition of a classical etude, received effusive praise. That day, Amira learned that her spirited music, her authentic expression, was not valued in their structured world. It was a sting that settled deep, teaching her that her truth often had to be tempered, hidden, or even denied, to fit into molds not made for her. Another memory, sharper, more cutting, surfaced. She was 9, at a local arts summer camp, a scholarship kid among children from affluent families. During a group improvisation exercise, Amira's natural flair for rhythm and blues, for weaving intricate, unexpected harmonies, had instinctively taken over. She had brought a vibrant energy to the session, a joyous, unrestrained flow of creativity. But she remembered the uncomfortable silence that followed, the subtle glances exchanged between the instructors. Later, one instructor had pulled her aside, her voice gentle but firm. "Amira, your enthusiasm is admirable, but perhaps try to stick to the framework. Dear, your interpretations can be a little disruptive. We strive for harmony here, a cohesive sound." The message was clear. Her unique voice, her inherent musicality, was seen as a deviation, an anomaly that threatened the established order. It wasn't about her talent, it was about her difference. She saw the discomfort, the polite disapproval, and understood. To survive, to continue getting access to the limited resources available to her, she had to conform, to make herself smaller, less noticeable. These were the silent battles she had fought, the invisible bruises she carried. She learned to observe, to anticipate, to measure the expectations of others before revealing too much of herself. She learned that sometimes the best way to move forward was not to directly challenge prejudice, but to absorb its blows, to endure, and to let her actions speak when words would only invite more scorn. The piano became her sanctuary, a place where she could shed the societal expectations and simply be. Every note she played, every melody she discovered, was a quiet act of rebellion, a reaffirmation of her true self, hidden beneath layers of practiced composure. So now, sitting on the cold bench at Blackwood, under the glaring scrutiny of Teacher Royce, the humiliation wasn't just a moment of shame, it was a familiar ache. It was the echo of all the times she had been told she wasn't enough, wasn't the right kind of enough, wasn't traditional enough. But beneath the initial wave of shame, a deeper current stirred within her, the quiet, unyielding strength that Nana Rose had instilled, the raw, defiant passion for music that no condescending teacher or rigid academy could truly extinguish. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, not in defeat, but in a silent recalibration. She wouldn't play for Royce, or for the judging eyes of her new peers. She would play for the girl who found solace in chipped keys, for the spirit that refused to be confined. This public humiliation, intended to break her, was instead igniting a quiet fire, tempered by years of forced endurance. She would endure this, too, but not without leaving her mark. The note Amira played was not the simple scale Royce had demanded. It was a single, sustained chord, deep and resonant, its unexpected harmony echoing through the hushed hall. Her fingers, which had felt clumsy moments before, now moved with an almost ethereal grace, transforming the rudimentary exercise into something profound, something that spoke of hidden depths. A ripple went through the audience, a collective shift as initial skepticism gave way to a hesitant curiosity. Royce's face, initially a mask of anticipated triumph, tightened, a flicker of something akin to surprise, then irritation, crossing his features. Amira finished the required notes, but she added a subtle, elegant flourish, a quiet assertion of her own musicality that was both obedient and subversive. She concluded the piece, her hands resting lightly on the keys, her gaze unwavering as she met Royce's rigid stare. The silence that followed was different now, less expectant of failure, more pregnant with an unreadable tension. Royce's lips thinned, he cleared his throat, a sharp, dismissive sound. Adequate, Daniels, adequate for a beginner, perhaps with considerable effort. You might overcome your unconventional habits. His words were an attempt to reassert control, to diminish what the room had clearly witnessed. He motioned for her to return to her seat, his gaze sweeping over the students, daring them to react. Amira walked back, her spine straighter than before, a quiet defiance in her posture. She had survived the first volley, but the incident had etched itself into the consciousness of the academy. She was now the new black girl who played differently, a whispered label that preceded her. Life at Blackwood settled into a rigid, unforgiving routine. Amira found herself placed in the remedial piano class, despite her obvious talent, a class filled with much younger children struggling with basic finger exercises. Royce himself taught the advanced classes, and she was deliberately excluded from his direct tutelage, a clear message that her place was on the periphery. She attended her general music theory classes, history lectures filled with names she had never heard of, all white, all European. The curriculum felt like a carefully constructed wall, designed to exclude any musical tradition that wasn't rooted in Western classical forms. Whenever she tried to introduce concepts from jazz or blues, even subtly referencing a rhythmic pattern or a chord progression, her contributions were met with blank stares, polite disinterest, or outright dismissal from her teachers. "That's not Blackwood's focus, Amira," was the common refrain, spoken with an air of patient superiority. The covert discrimination manifested in 1,000 tiny ways. Her practice room, allocated after much delay, was tucked away in the furthest, least accessible corner of the basement. Near the noisy boiler room, the grand pianos in the main practice suites, polished and perfectly tuned, were always reserved for other students, usually those with prestigious lineage or a family name etched into the Academy's donation plaques. Amira was often given older, less responsive instruments. Their keys sometimes sticky, their pedals creaking. These were minor inconveniences, perhaps, but they accumulated, a constant reminder of her secondary status in group ensemble lessons. Her ideas for interpretations were often overlooked or quietly redirected. When she suggested a more dynamic phrasing or a nuanced rhythm, a fellow student, often one with a less inspired but technically correct approach, would be praised for their adherence to the score. Her classmates, mostly polite but distant, maintained a cautious distance. Some seemed to subtly avoid her, perhaps sensing the unspoken disapproval that clung to her. a residue of Royce's initial public humiliation. Others offered hesitant smiles, fleeting glances of sympathy, but none dared to break ranks and overtly befriend her. There was an unspoken code, a subtle social pressure to conform, to not associate too closely with anyone deemed outside. The only truly sympathetic presence was a quiet, unassuming older music history teacher, Ms. Evelyn Reed, who often observed the classes with a thoughtful, almost mournful expression. Mrs. Reed occasionally offered Amira a kind word, a gentle nod that conveyed a deeper understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the subtle injustices she witnessed. Her quiet support was a lifeline, a flicker of humanity in the academy's cold. Traditional halls. Amira noticed Ms. Reed's eyes lingering on her, a knowing sorrow that spoke volumes about the unspoken battles Ms. Reed herself might have fought within these very walls. This unspoken connection, though minimal, was a crucial anchor for Amira. One afternoon, during an impromptu student showcase, a casual event intended to foster camaraderie, Amira hesitantly signed up to play. She chose a challenging classical piece, mastering its intricacies with hours of dedicated practice in her dimly lit basement room. She played with precision and passion, each note singing, each phrase imbued with her unique emotional depth. The small audience of students and a few faculty members listened intently. When she finished, a smattering of polite applause filled the room. But when teacher Royce, who had unexpectedly appeared, offered his critique, his words were a cold shower. Technically proficient, Daniels, he conceded, his voice flat. But where is the soul, the understanding of the composer's original intent? Music is not merely about hitting the right notes. It is about embodying the spirit of the masters. You lack the inherent connection to the great works. He then turned to another student, praising their innate musicality for a performance that, while technically sound, was undeniably sterile. The implication was clear: her talent, no matter how evident, would always be deemed insufficient because she lacked the right background, the right lineage. It wasn't about what she could do, it was about who she was and who she wasn't. Amira felt a familiar, burning frustration rise within her. It was the same dismissive undertone she had encountered countless times before, but amplified by the Academy's hallowed halls and Royce's undeniable power. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that this wasn't about her performance. It was about her very presence, a disruption to their carefully constructed narrative of what true talent and musical excellence looked like. The systemic abuse wasn't loud or violent. It was a slow, steady erosion, a constant chipping away at her confidence, designed to make her question her own worth, to conform, or eventually, to simply leave. But each subtle slight, rather than breaking her, was hardening her resolve, forging a quiet strength. The idea that she lacked inherent connection stung, but it also ignited a fierce conviction she would prove them wrong. Not just with her playing, but by challenging the very narrow definition of what they considered music and talent. The challenge was clear to exist, and to thrive. She had to dismantle the invisible walls they had built around her. The insidious drip of discrimination continued its slow, corrosive work. Every polite dismissal, every subtle redirection, every veiled critique of her unconventional habits chipped away at Amira's initial resolve. The basement practice room, with its distant, rattling pipes and faint, perpetual smell of mildew, became a physical manifestation of her marginalized status, while her peers honed their craft on pristine grand pianos in sunlit studios. Amira wrestled with the heavy, unresponsive keys of the Academy's oldest upright, its pedals often sticking, its strings humming with a mournful, off-key echo. This wasn't just about sound, it was about spirit. The silence of the other students, their polite avoidance, formed an invisible wall around her, reinforcing Royce's unspoken narrative. It was a suffocating pressure, a constant reminder that she was an outsider, tolerated but not truly accepted. One frigid afternoon, a particularly scathing critique from a minor instructor, who had echoed Royce's sentiment about Amira lacking inherent understanding of a classical sonata, finally snapped something within her. The instructor had dissected her emotional interpretation, labeling it overly sentimental and unrefined, completely missing the raw, powerful feelings Amira had poured into each note. Back in her cramped practice room, the old piano seemed to mock her, its dull keys reflecting the grayness of her mood. The frustration, long suppressed, boiled over. She slammed her hands down on the keys, producing a jarring, dissonant chord, a cry of pent-up anger. This wasn't just about music anymore. It was about dignity, about her very identity. Instead of practicing the sterile exercises prescribed for her remedial class, Amira found herself instinctively playing something else. Her fingers, no longer constrained by rigid scores, began to weave a tapestry of sound that was entirely her own. It began as a mournful blues progression, rich with the echoes of her grandmother's voice, then morphed into a vibrant, rhythmic jazz improvisation, a spontaneous outpouring of her spirit. The music was defiant, unrestrained, a raw protest against the suffocating conformity of Blackwood. She played with a fierce, almost desperate energy, each chord a challenge, each melody a declaration. The noise from the boiler room, usually a nuisance, now seemed to blend with her raw, percussive rhythms, becoming a defiant backdrop to her burgeoning rebellion. She played for hours, losing herself in the intricate dance of her own creation, a blend of her street-smart rhythms and a yearning for the complex harmonies of the classical masters she was learning to admire, but on her own terms. She didn't notice the soft click of the door to her practice room, nor the figure that quietly slipped in and sat on a forgotten stool in the shadows. It was Ms. Evelyn Reed, the kindly music history teacher, her face etched with a look of profound recognition, her eyes glistening. Mrs. Reed had often felt a pang of sadness seeing Amira isolated, her vibrant talent subtly stifled. She had seen the raw, undeniable spark in Amira during the initial assessment, a spark that Royce had so cruelly attempted to extinguish. Miss Reed herself had once been a rebel in these very halls, a young scholar daring to introduce discussions of diverse musical traditions, only to be met with the same cold, systemic resistance. She recognized Amira's battle because it was, in many ways, her own. When Amira finally lifted her hands from the keys, the last notes fading into the hum of the boiler, she became aware of Miss Reed's silent presence. A flush of embarrassment washed over her. She had been caught, exposed, playing something so utterly outside the Academy's strictures. "I'm sorry, Miss Reed," Amira whispered, her voice tight with shame. "I know I should be practicing the curriculum." Ms. Reed gently shook her head, her gaze soft but unwavering. "Sorry, Amira, that was magnificent." Her voice was quiet but firm, filled with a genuine admiration that cut through years of Amira's conditioning to hide her true musical self. "That was your voice, child, unfiltered, authentic, and truly beautiful. Do you know how rare that is? In these walls, so." Reed paused, then moved closer, her eyes scanning the dusty, neglected piano. "This instrument, it doesn't do you justice. Your talent, Amira, deserves more." The next day, a small, unassuming note appeared on Amira's locker. It simply said, "Practice room 3B after 6 p.m. It's usually empty. E.R." Practice room 3B was on the third floor, one of the coveted, rarely available grand piano suites, with perfect acoustics and a panoramic view of the Academy's meticulously manicured gardens. It was an indirect act, a quiet subversion of the Academy's unspoken rules, facilitated by a sympathetic insider. That evening, Amira arrived at 3B, her heart thumping, with a mix of trepidation and exhilarating hope. The room was indeed empty, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The grand piano gleamed under the recessed lights, its polished surface reflecting the fading sky tentatively. Amira touched the keys. They were perfectly weighted, responsive, singing with a rich, vibrant tone that the old basement upright could only dream of. For the first time, Amira felt a piano truly respond to her touch, amplifying her intentions. Rather than resisting them, she began to play, not the defiant improvisations of yesterday, but something more deliberate, more composed. She started working on a complex classical piece, a challenging concerto that she had admired but deemed beyond her reach given her current resources. But now, with a proper instrument, she found new nuances, new layers of understanding. As the days turned into weeks, Miss Reed continued her quiet support. She would accidentally leave advanced sheet music on Amira's desk or casually mention obscure composers who explored different musical traditions. She never spoke overtly about Royce's prejudice, but her actions were a clear counter-narrative to the systemic abuse Amira faced. Miss Reed also initiated a small, informal music appreciation club for a handful of students, including Amira. In these sessions, she subtly steered discussions toward diverse musical forms, from African rhythms to Eastern European folk melodies, slowly broadening the narrow perspectives of the Blackwood students, and crucially, validating Amira's own inherent understanding of music beyond the Western classical canon. This quiet, consistent support from Miss Reed was Amira's first true act of resistance. It wasn't a loud confrontation, but a subtle, yet powerful, undermining of the systemic barriers. It was a lifeline, a silent acknowledgement that her talent was seen, valued, and nurtured. Even as the official channels sought to diminish it, it gave Amira the courage to push further, to refine her skills on a proper instrument, and to quietly integrate her unique voice into the classical forms she was now mastering, knowing that somewhere, someone believed in her. The subtle act of providing a better practice space, a better instrument, and a broader intellectual context allowed Amira's own unique musicality to flourish, becoming a burgeoning, undeniable force. This was the seed of her defiance, planted and watered by a kindred spirit within the very institution that sought to stifle her. The annual Blackwood Academy Fall Gala was more than just a concert. It was a revered institution, a showcase of the Academy's finest talents, and a crucial fundraising event. The air in the grand auditorium crackled with anticipation, a blend of nervous excitement from the young performers and discerning expectation from the affluent audience. Teacher Albert Royce, impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of self-importance, was everywhere, personally overseeing every detail, his eyes gleaming with pride at the polished precision of his institution. He saw the gala as the ultimate validation of Blackwood's unwavering commitment to classical purity, a direct reflection of his own stringent standards. Amira, despite her remarkable progress, had not been selected to perform her presence in the advanced classes. Thanks to Ms. Reed's subtle interventions and Amira's own relentless practice in the coveted room 3B, was still viewed with a cautious, almost reluctant acceptance by the other faculty members. Royce, however, remained adamantly against her inclusion in any public performance. Her technique is improving, he had conceded begrudgingly to a colleague, but she still lacks the gravitas, the fundamental understanding of form. One cannot simply will musicality into being. He saw her as an anomaly, a potential stain on Blackwood's pristine reputation, and kept her rigidly excluded from any opportunity to shine. However, fate, or perhaps a whispered suggestion from Miss Reed, had a different plan. The scheduled performance by the Academy's most promising piano prodigy, a favored student of Royce, was suddenly jeopardized. The prodigy, a brilliant but notoriously high-strung boy named Julian Thorne, suffered a severe anxiety attack moments before his cue, rendering him unable to perform. Panic rippled through the backstage area. The director, a flustered woman named Mrs. Albright, frantically sought a replacement. Time was running out. The audience was growing restless. It was Ms. Reed who stepped forward, her voice calm amidst the chaos. "Amira Daniels is here." Mrs. Albright, She has been practicing the Schumann fantasy Stuka. She knows it flawlessly. Mrs. Albright hesitated, her gaze flickering toward Royce, who stood nearby, his face a thundercloud. Royce overheard. "Daniels, absolutely not," he barked, his voice sharp with indignant outrage. "She is hardly prepared for such an occasion. Her presence would be detrimental." "She is more than prepared, Albert," Miss Reed countered, her voice firm, unwavering. "She plays with a depth that Julian, for all his brilliance, has yet to achieve. This is an opportunity, not a risk." Ms. Reed's uncharacteristic boldness stemmed from a quiet fury that had been building for months, witnessing Amira's talent systematically undermined. She knew this was the moment. The stakes were too high to remain silent. A few faculty members, those who had quietly observed Amira's progress and the undeniable truth of her skill, exchanged uneasy glances. They were torn between their loyalty to Royce and the undeniable need to salvage the evening. The audience murmured. The clock ticked. Finally, Mrs. Albright, desperate, made a decision. "Daniels, you're on," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and reluctant hope. "Go get ready." Amira, who had been listening to the frantic exchange from a shadowed corner, felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and exhilarating. This was it. The public stage, the discerning audience, the hostile gaze of Teacher Royce as she walked towards the wings. Royce cornered her, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "Do not disappoint me, Daniels. You will play exactly as written. No interpretations, no flourishes. One wrong note, and your scholarship is forfeit. Understand?" His words were a direct threat, a final attempt to break her, to force her into a suffocating conformity. He wanted her to fail, to validate his bigotry. Amira met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She said nothing, but a quiet fire burned in her eyes. She walked onto the stage, the sudden silence of the vast auditorium deafening. She took a deep breath, settling onto the piano bench. The Schumann Fantasy Stuka was a complex, emotionally charged piece, a composition demanding not just technical prowess, but profound musical understanding. Amira closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, allowing the music to flow through her, channeling every slight, every dismissal, every quiet moment of defiance into the impending performance. Her fingers touched the keys, and the first notes filled the hall. They were not merely correct, they vibrated with a raw, undeniable power, a profound emotional depth that silenced every whisper, every murmur. Amira didn't just play the notes, she lived them. Her interpretation was technically flawless, but it was also infused with a unique passion, a vibrant energy that was unmistakably her own. She brought a dynamic range, a rhythmic vitality, and a lyrical expressiveness that transcended the strict adherence to the score, revealing new facets of the familiar piece. The audience, initially expecting a mere replacement, found themselves mesmerized. Heads tilted, eyes widened. A collective gasp rippled through the hall as Amira soared through the difficult passages, each note a testament to her hours of solitary practice, her unwavering dedication. She didn't just play Schumann, she reimagined it, imbuing it with a soulful resonance that spoke to universal truths, bridging the gap between classical tradition and her own rich musical heritage. The emotional intensity was palpable, gripping the audience in a way no previous performance had. Mid-performance, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere. The quietly supporting students, who had maintained their distance, now leaned forward, their faces alight with awe. Even the most stoic faculty members showed faint cracks in their composure, their expressions shifting from polite attention to genuine astonishment. Then, a few more students, initially hesitant, began to clap softly during a brief pause in the music, a small, tentative rebellion against the Academy's rigid decorum. The applause spread, a ripple of defiance growing into a wave. a spontaneous expression of undeniable appreciation that broke through the hushed formality of the gala. Teacher Royce, standing at the back of the hall, watched in stunned silence. His face, initially a mask of rigid disapproval, slowly contorted. His eyes, fixed on Amira, widened in disbelief. He saw not just technical brilliance, but a profound artistry, a depth of feeling that defied his every preconceived notion. The raw, undeniable talent emanating from the stage was a direct contradiction to everything he had asserted about her. He saw the audience's reaction, the palpable shift in their engagement, the dawning realization of what they were witnessing. This was not the timid, unconventional girl he had dismissed. This was a force of nature, a true musical genius. The evidence was irrefutable, undeniable, and it was playing right before his very eyes. The public humiliation he had intended for her had backfired spectacularly, transforming into her triumphant debut. The confrontation was not a spoken word, but a deafening performance, a direct challenge to his authority and his deeply ingrained biases. The final resonant chord of Amira's Schumann hung in the air, a shimmering testament to profound artistry, before slowly dissolving into a stunned, appreciative silence. Then, as if a dam had broken, the auditorium erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was a roaring, spontaneous ovation. A wave of collective astonishment and genuine admiration that swept through the gilded hall. Students, faculty, and benefactors alike rose to their feet, their faces alight with an undeniable awe. Amira remained seated for a moment, bathed in the blinding stage lights. The sheer force of the audience's reaction, a dizzying rush. When she finally rose, a quiet smile touched her lips, not of triumph, but of pure, unadulterated musical catharsis. She bowed, a simple, elegant gesture, and exited the stage, leaving behind a reverberating silence that was louder than any roar. Backstage, chaos ensued. Mrs. Albright, the director, was visibly shaken, her initial relief at the salvaged performance quickly morphing into a dawning realization of the implications. "Amira, that was extraordinary," she stammered, her voice thick with a mixture of shock and a nascent shame. Other faculty members crowded around, their earlier cautious silence replaced by effusive praise. They knew what they had just witnessed, not just a brilliant performance, but a public indictment of the Academy's unspoken biases, laid bare by the sheer power of Amira's talent. Teacher Albert Royce, however, was nowhere to be seen. He had slipped away, retreating from the humiliating spectacle of his prejudice being so utterly disproven. His reputation, built on years of rigid adherence to a narrow, exclusionary vision of classical music, had been shattered in a single breathtaking performance. The whispers began immediately, not just about Amira's talent, but about Royce's long-standing refusal to acknowledge it, his public dismissal of her, his thinly veiled racism. The evidence was no longer speculative. It was a live, undeniable experience that had just been shared by hundreds. The next morning, the ripple effect became a tidal wave. Social media, a force that Blackwood Academy, with its antiquated traditions, had largely ignored, exploded. Several students, inspired by Amira's bravery and the palpable injustice they had witnessed, began posting about the incident. Anonymous accounts emerged, detailing years of similar discriminatory practices under Royce's tenure. Talented students from diverse backgrounds systematically marginalized, their unique contributions dismissed as unrefined or unsuitable. One video, clandestinely recorded by a student during the initial assessment, showing Royce's cruel mockery of Amira, went viral, juxtaposed with clips of her stunning gala performance. The contrast was damning. Alumni, many of whom had experienced similar subtle biases themselves during their time at Blackwood, began to speak out. Letters of complaint flooded the dean's office. Parents, particularly those who had seen their children's dreams quietly stifled, demanded accountability. The Academy's Board of Trustees, a conservative body usually resistant to change, found itself under unprecedented pressure. Public perception, crucial for fundraising and maintaining Blackwood's elite status, was rapidly deteriorating. The carefully constructed facade of impartiality and meritocracy had crumbled. By midday, an emergency board meeting was convened. Mrs. Albright, bolstered by Ms. Reed's courageous testimony and the overwhelming public outcry, presented a scathing report outlining Royce's pattern of discriminatory behavior, citing not just Amira's case but others that had previously been swept under the rug. Ms. Reed, usually reserved, spoke with a fiery conviction, recounting years of witnessing prejudice, specifically targeting students who dared to deviate from the Academy's narrow, Eurocentric classical canon. She spoke of the subtle, insidious ways Amira had been marginalized, denied proper resources, and publicly shamed. She spoke of how Royce's actions directly contradicted the Academy's stated values of nurturing talent. The evidence was overwhelming. The video, the student testimonies, the alumni letters, all painted a damning picture. Faced with undeniable proof and the threat of severe reputational and financial damage, the board acted swiftly and decisively. Before the end of the day, an official statement was released. Teacher Albert Royce was immediately suspended pending a full investigation into his conduct. The language was carefully worded, emphasizing violations of academic integrity and breach of institutional values. But the message was clear. His reign of prejudiced authority was over. A full review of the Academy's admissions and departmental placement policies was also announced, signaling a broader acknowledgement of systemic issues. The community's response was swift and varied. Within Blackwood, a palpable shift occurred. The atmosphere, once stiff with unspoken tension, began to lighten. Students who had previously kept their distance from Amira now approached her with newfound respect, some even offering apologies for their passive complicity. The silent supporters, those who had offered fleeting glances of sympathy, now found their voices, openly discussing the need for change within the Academy. A small group of students, inspired by Amira, formed an unofficial diversity in music club, advocating for a broader curriculum and more inclusive practices. Outside the Academy, the story became a beacon. Local news picked up the narrative, transforming Amira from a quiet, talented girl into a symbol of courage against systemic injustice. Articles highlighted her journey, her extraordinary talent, and the antiquated biases she had faced. The story resonated with countless individuals who had experienced similar forms of subtle discrimination in their own lives, igniting conversations about privilege, access, and the insidious nature of prejudice in seemingly neutral institutions. Amira, unknowingly, had become a catalyst for change, not just within the hallowed halls of Blackwood, but in the wider community's perception of talent and belonging. The consequences of her single, powerful performance were far-reaching, setting in motion a chain of events that promised to shake the very foundations of the rigid institution. The immediate aftermath of the gala and Royce's suspension plunged Blackwood Academy into a maelstrom of introspection and forced change. For Amira, the sudden shift was disorienting. The whispers that had once been dismissive now carried a note of awe, sometimes even apology. Students who had previously avoided her now sought her out, eager to offer tentative friendships or simply to witness the girl who had single-handedly upended the Academy's rigid hierarchy. The old basement practice room lay empty, abandoned. Amira now had full access to the finest grand pianos, her choices unlimited. Yet, the memory of that dingy room and the defiant music born within its confines lingered, a stark reminder of the battle she had just fought. The board's investigation into Royce's conduct quickly uncovered a deeply entrenched pattern of bias, not just against students of color, but against anyone whose musical expression deviated from his rigid, Eurocentric ideals. Several other faculty members, emboldened by Miss Reed's courage, came forward with their own testimonies, confirming years of covert discrimination. The Academy, desperate to salvage its reputation, swiftly implemented new policies, including mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff and a review of the music curriculum to incorporate a wider range of global musical traditions. Amira, initially overwhelmed by the attention, found herself thrust into a new role, that of a reluctant spokesperson. The local news stories expanded. National media outlets picked up her extraordinary narrative, transforming her from a quiet, talented student into a symbol of resilience and a catalyst for institutional change. Interviewer requests poured in, but Amira, still only 11, felt a deep reluctance to simply relive the pain. She wanted to share her story, but on her own terms, focusing on the power of music and the importance of authentic expression, rather than just the trauma of discrimination. It was Miss Reed, once again, who guided her. "Your voice, Amira, is powerful," she advised during one of their quiet conversations. "But you don't have to shout to be heard. You can let your music speak, and you can share your truth in a way that truly inspires." Inspired by this, Amira began to use social media, not just as a reactive tool, but as a platform for proactive change. With Ms. Reed's gentle guidance and the technical help of a few supportive classmates, she started a small online campaign. Her first post was simple, a short video of her playing a complex classical piece, followed by a snippet of her own improvised jazz-infused melody. The caption read, "Music has no color, no limits. It only has heart." The video went viral. People were captivated not just by her undeniable talent, but by the raw honesty of her message. She then began sharing short, poignant anecdotes from her time at Blackwood, not explicitly naming Royce, but describing the subtle slights, the feeling of being unseen, the constant pressure to conform. She talked about the importance of embracing one's unique identity, even when faced with pressure to be someone you're not. Her social media presence grew exponentially. Her diversity in music club at Blackwood, once a small, informal gathering, blossomed into a recognized student organization. They organized open mic nights where students could perform any genre of music. Defying the Academy's traditional strictures, they hosted discussions about underrepresented composers and musical traditions. Amira, leading by example, played everything from classical concertos to soulful gospel hymns, demonstrating the universal language of music. Her performances were often accompanied by short, powerful messages about breaking down barriers and celebrating cultural richness. The traction she gained extended beyond the Academy walls. Other young musicians, particularly those from marginalized communities who had faced similar struggles, reached out to her, sharing their own stories. Amira responded with empathy and encouragement, fostering a growing online community centered around authentic musical expression and challenging ingrained biases. She started a series of online Amira's Harmony sessions, inviting musicians from diverse backgrounds to collaborate and share their unique sounds, blurring the lines between genres and cultures. These sessions, streamed live, attracted thousands of viewers, showcasing the richness and variety of music beyond the Western classical canon. Prominent figures in the music industry, particularly those advocating for greater diversity and inclusion, noticed Amira's burgeoning influence. Invitations to speak at music conferences and workshops began to trickle in. Her story, once confined to the halls of Blackwood, was now resonating on a global scale. She spoke articulately, with a quiet but firm conviction, about the importance of equitable access to music education, about nurturing talent regardless of background, and about the inherent bias embedded in many traditional institutions. Amira's process of rebuilding wasn't just about recovering from the trauma. It was about actively shaping a new narrative, not just for herself, but for countless others. She was transforming her personal ordeal into a powerful movement, using her musical gift and her newfound platform to challenge systemic injustice and inspire a new generation of diverse musicians. The silence that had once defined her endurance had been replaced by a chorus of voices, her own clear and strong at its heart, resonating with a message of hope, inclusion, and the boundless power of music. Months passed, and the whispers within Blackwood Academy transformed into a vibrant chorus of change. Teacher Albert Royce, after a thorough and public investigation, was not only permanently dismissed, but also faced public censure from several music associations for his discriminatory practices. His actions served as a stark, cautionary tale, echoing through the hallowed halls he once dominated. Blackwood Academy, humbled by the scandal, initiated a comprehensive overhaul. The curriculum was diversified, new faculty members from varied backgrounds were hired, and a scholarship fund for underprivileged students was established in Amira's name, ensuring that talent, not background, would be the sole criterion for entry. The old, dusty, upright piano from the basement practice room was symbolically placed in the main lobby, cleaned and polished, a silent monument to the quiet revolution it had witnessed. Amira, no longer just a student, was now a celebrated figure, both within Blackwood and in the wider world. Her online Amira's Harmony sessions continued to flourish, fostering a global community of musicians dedicated to inclusivity. She performed at prestigious venues, not as a prodigy in the traditional sense, but as an artist whose music transcended boundaries, weaving together classical precision with the soulful improvisation of jazz and the rhythmic complexity of her own heritage. Her performances were often interspersed with short, powerful speeches, delivered with a quiet but unwavering conviction, advocating for diversity, empathy, and the dismantling of systemic barriers in education and the arts. The most poignant moment came at Blackwood Academy's annual graduation ceremony. It was a clear, crisp spring day, the air filled with the scent of blooming jasmine, as the graduating class, a diverse group now, prepared to receive their diplomas. The dean, Mrs. Albright, stepped forward, her voice resonating with genuine emotion. She spoke of the Academy's past shortcomings, its journey of self-reflection, and its renewed commitment to true excellence. Then, she called Amira to the stage. Amira, dressed in a simple, elegant gown, walked towards the podium. Her head held high, the entire audience rose, a spontaneous standing ovation echoing through the auditorium, a wave of respect and gratitude washing over her. The silence that followed was reverent, expectant. Amira took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the faces before her, her once reserved classmates, Ms. Reed beaming from the faculty section, and even a few of the older board members. Their expressions now softened with a visible sense of pride and regret. When I first came to Blackwood, Amira began, her voice clear and steady, I felt like an outsider. My music, my voice, seemed to exist outside the lines that had been drawn here. I was taught that certain traditions were right and others were wrong. I learned that sometimes. Silence felt safer than speaking my truth. She paused, her eyes meeting Ms. Reed's, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. But music, true music, doesn't recognize lines. It doesn't care about your skin color, or where you come from, or how much money you have. Music cares about heart. It cares about connection. It cares about truth. She continued, the challenges I faced here were difficult. Yes, but they also showed me something important, that true strength isn't about conforming. It's about having the courage to be yourself. Even when the world tries to make you smaller, it's about knowing that your unique voice is not a flaw, but a gift. She then looked directly at the new students in the audience, her gaze warm and encouraging. To all of you who are just starting your journey, remember this, don't let anyone tell you your music isn't valid. Don't let anyone silence your song, your experiences, your heritage, your truth. They are all part of the beautiful symphony you have to offer the world. She walked to the grand piano, the same one she had played at the gala, and sat down. For a moment, she closed her eyes, her hands resting lightly on the keys. Then she began to play. It was a new composition, a piece she had created herself, brimming with intricate harmonies, a fusion of classical elegance, soulful blues, and vibrant, percussive rhythms. It was a testament to her journey, a melody that spoke of overcoming adversity, of finding harmony in diversity, and of the unyielding power of the human spirit. The music swelled, filling the hall, a vibrant, emotional tapestry that celebrated every facet of her being, every lesson learned, every battle won. The performance was breathtaking, a culmination of her resilience and artistry. When the final notes faded, a single tear traced a path down Mrs. Albright's cheek. The audience remained in a stunned silence. Then slowly, a deep, collective sigh of emotional release filled the space. Then a thunderous ovation erupted, a sound that spoke not just of appreciation, but of a profound awakening. Amira had not just played music. She had redefined what it meant to belong, what it meant to be heard. The Academy, once a symbol of exclusionary tradition, was now, through Amira's influence, becoming a beacon of inclusive excellence. Her story, etched into its very foundations, served as a permanent reminder that true genius thrives when all voices are not just tolerated, but celebrated. Amira Daniels, the quiet girl who had once been publicly shamed, had not just found justice, she had awakened a community, leaving behind an indelible message that talent knows no boundaries, and that the most beautiful music is made when every unique note is allowed to sing, freely and fearlessly, in harmony. Her message, resonating with every powerful chord, echoed far beyond the Academy walls, inspiring countless others to find their own voices and challenge the silent prejudices that lingered in the world.